She apologized 12 times in just 15 minutes at the doctor's office. The doctor stopped everything and said something that changed her life forever. If you also apologize for breathing, for taking up space, for existing, this video will completely transform you. Maria woke up at 6:30 a.m. as always. The first thought that crossed her mind wasn't gratitude for the new day, nor plans for the hours that would follow. It was a silent apology to the universe for taking up another day of existence. At 47 years old, she had perfected the art of making herself smaller. It was as if she carried an invisible manual titled, "How Not to Bother Anyone by Existing," and followed every page religiously. In the bathroom, she lightly bumped into her husband, who was brushing his teeth. "Sorry," she murmured automatically, even though it was her own bathroom, in her own house. Carlos didn't even respond. He was used to this morning ritual of apologies that punctuated Maria's every movement. She went down to the kitchen and started preparing coffee. When Carlos appeared, already dressed for work, she hurried. "Sorry, honey. I took a little longer in the shower today. The coffee is almost ready. Sorry for the delay." 15 minutes. She had only taken 15 minutes in the bathroom, the normal amount of time for any person. But Maria apologized as if she had committed a crime against humanity. The kids came down next. João, 19 years old, took the last piece of bread from the basket. "Sorry, Mom. I took the last one," he said unconsciously, mimicking the pattern he had learned at home. "No, son. I'm sorry I didn't buy more bread yesterday. I'm really sorry," Maria responded, already mentally calculating how she would leave work early to stop by the bakery. Luisa, 16 years old, complained that her blouse was wrinkled. "Sorry, sweetheart. Yesterday was such a rush. Sorry, I should have ironed it last night. I'm really sorry." Maria's female self-esteem had been shaped by decades of small acts of self-sabotage. Each apology was a way of making herself smaller, less important, less worthy of space in the world. At work, the situation repeated itself with mathematical precision. Maria arrived at the office where she had worked as an administrative assistant for 12 years. Her desk was in a corner, a position she had chosen so as not to get in anyone's way. "Good morning, everyone," she said quietly as she entered. "Excuse me, may I get through?" she asked when crossing paths with two colleagues. In the hallway, a wide hallway where 5 people could easily fit side by side. She sat at her desk and turned on the computer. The first email of the day began exactly like all the others. "Good morning. Sorry to bother you, but I need to confirm the monthly report data." Bother. As if doing her job was a favor she was asking for, not a professional obligation she was paid for. During the 10 a.m. meeting, Maria had a valuable suggestion about how to optimize the filing process. She raised her hand timidly. "Sorry, this might be a silly idea, but sorry if I'm talking nonsense, but could we maybe organize the files by date instead of by department? Sorry, maybe it doesn't make sense." Her idea was excellent. Everyone agreed immediately. But Maria had apologized 4 times before managing to express it completely. At lunchtime, she went to the self-service restaurant near the office. In line, the man in front of her dropped some coins. Maria bent down to help gather them. "Sorry," she said, returning the coins. "Sorry for what? For helping? For being kind? For existing in the same space as another person?" The man looked at her, confused. "Sorry for what? Thanks for the help." But Maria had already turned around, frowning at herself. Even in kindness, she apologized. Back at the office, her colleague Sandra commented casually, "Wow, Maria, you apologize for everything, even for breathing." The observation echoed in Maria's mind for the rest of the afternoon. Was it true? Did she really apologize for breathing? She started paying attention. She apologized for asking the time, for asking someone to repeat information she hadn't heard properly, for coughing during a phone call, for existing. Her real beauty was buried under layers and layers of unnecessary apologies. As if her presence in the world was a mistake that needed to be constantly justified and minimized. At 6 p.m., she put away her things and prepared to leave. In the elevator, 3 more people got in. "Sorry, am I crowding you?" she asked, even though there was enough space for 2 more people. The elevator went down in silence, but Maria couldn't stop thinking about Sandra's observation. Did she really apologize for everything? And more importantly, why? The way home was a disturbing revelation. Maria began mentally counting how many times she apologized unnecessarily. In traffic, she waved apologetically to a driver she hadn't even bothered. At the bakery, she apologized for taking too long to choose bread. 30 seconds of indecision between French bread and sandwich bread. She arrived home carrying not only the groceries, but a question that was beginning to bother her. When exactly had she learned that her existence should come accompanied by a perpetual apology? 50-word YouTube hook. She apologized 12 times in just 15 minutes at the doctor's office. The doctor stopped everything and said something that changed her life forever. If you also apologize for breathing, for taking up space, for existing, this video will completely transform you. The question that Maria took home that night didn't let her sleep peacefully. For the first time in a long time, she began paying real attention to her own behavior, as if she were observing herself from the outside. The next morning, she decided to conduct a silent experiment, count how many times she apologized unnecessarily. The result would shock her. At the supermarket during her weekend shopping, Maria was pushing her cart down the cleaning products aisle when a younger woman, talking loudly on the phone, simply stopped in front of the shelves, completely blocking the passage. Maria waited and waited. The woman continued her call, gesturing, totally oblivious to the fact that she was preventing other people from getting through. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you," Maria said quietly. The woman looked at her with irritation, as if Maria were the inconvenient one in the situation, and moved aside just enough for her to pass. "Sorry," Maria murmured again as she went by. 3 yards ahead, she stopped. Sorry for what? For wanting to do her shopping? For existing in the same public space? The woman had been clearly disrespectful, but Maria was the one who apologized. Observing other people in the supermarket, Maria began to notice something revealing. There were women who moved naturally, who said, "Excuse me," without the tone of apology, who occupied space with dignity. Strong women who didn't seem to carry the weight of having to justify their existence. An elegantly dressed lady with gray hair went through a similar situation. When a young man blocked her path while looking at his phone, she said firmly and politely, "Excuse me, I need to get through." There was no apology, no submissive tone. It was just a legitimate request, said with dignity. Maria saw herself reflected in this difference as in a cruel mirror. Her true reflection wasn't what she saw in the glass of the supermarket freezers, but what she perceived in her behavior. A woman who had learned to systematically diminish herself. At the checkout, the cashier was rude. He threw the products, carelessly, didn't respond to Maria's "good morning," and even made an irritated face when she needed to look for her card in her purse. "Sorry, it's here somewhere," Maria murmured, nervously rummaging through her purse. "Sorry for the delay," she said when she finally found the card. "Sorry," she repeated when the machine took a while to process the payment, something completely out of her control. The cashier didn't even respond. He simply handed over the receipt with a bored expression and called the next customer. Maria left there feeling diminished, but for the first time, questioning why. Why did she apologize for normal life situations? Why did she feel obligated to justify taking up space in the world? At the pharmacy, the situation repeated itself. The pharmacist was clearly in a bad mood and served everyone with rudeness. "Sorry, do you have this medicine?" Maria asked, showing the prescription. "Sorry, can you repeat the name?" "I didn't hear it right," she said, when the pharmacist grumbled something inaudible. "Sorry, this is the right one," she confirmed when the woman threw the box on the counter. While waiting for change, Maria observed the customer in front of her. A woman about 50 years old, well-dressed, who had made the same request without a single sorry. When the pharmacist was rude, the woman simply said, "I prefer more polite service," and asked to speak with the manager. Maria was impressed. Not with the complaint, but with the naturalness. That woman didn't apologize for having service standards, didn't diminish herself for demanding basic respect. She simply existed with dignity. In the parking lot, while putting the groceries in her car, Maria reflected on these encounters. It was as if the world were a big mirror showing different ways of existing, and she was finally paying attention to the differences. Some women moved through the world asking permission to exist. Others simply existed, naturally, without apologizing, for occupying their legitimate space. During the family lunch, the family dynamic perfectly mirrored this observation. Carlos complained about the food. The rice was a little dry. "Sorry, honey. I was on the phone and forgot to stir it," Maria apologized immediately. "Sorry. Next time I'll pay more attention," she added. Carlos just grumbled and continued eating. He didn't thank her for cooking, didn't acknowledge the effort, just accepted the apologies as if they were her natural obligation. Luisa complained that the blouse she wanted wasn't clean. "Sorry, sweetheart. I didn't see it was in the basket. Sorry, I can wash it now if you want." "Sorry, I should have asked yesterday," Maria continued, even knowing that Luisa had 10 other clean blouses in her closet. João asked for money to go out with friends. When Maria said money was a little tight in the budget, he made a sour face. "Sorry, son. It's just that this month we had those extra bills. Sorry, but next week I can give you a little something." She apologized for not having infinite money, for being human, for having financial limitations like any normal family. After lunch, while washing dishes, Maria looked at herself in the kitchen window, which functioned as a mirror with the afternoon sun. But this time, she didn't just see her tired face. She saw a female history that had been repeating itself for decades, that of the woman who learned that her existence was an inconvenience that needed to be constantly apologized for. How many women did she know who lived like this? How many friends, colleagues, relatives carried this same invisible weight? Her internal emotional narrative began making disturbing connections. When had she started apologizing for everything? Had she always been like this? Or had she learned, at some point, that taking up space was wrong? The afternoon was ending when Maria realized she had mentally counted more than 20 unnecessary apologies just that day. 20 times when she diminished herself over completely normal life situations. It was as if she carried an invisible backpack full of chronic guilt, and with each unnecessary apology, she added more weight. But maybe for the first time she was beginning to truly feel that weight, and weight that is felt is the first step toward being relieved. The weight that Maria had begun to feel manifested itself unexpectedly the following Tuesday. She woke up with a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't pain, but a kind of tightness that accompanied her throughout breakfast. "Sorry, honey. I think I'm going to need to schedule a doctor's appointment," she told Carlos, as if needing medical care was an inconvenience she was causing the family. "Sorry, it's just a routine checkup. Nothing serious," she quickly added, minimizing any concern he might have, or any attention she might receive. She managed to get an appointment with Dr. Helena Martins for that same afternoon. It was a clinic that accepted her insurance, and Maria had never consulted with this doctor before. In the waiting room, while waiting to be called, Maria observed the other patients. Some leafed through magazines naturally. Others talked on the phone without worrying if they were bothering anyone. A woman about 60 years old even asked the receptionist to turn down the air conditioning, without a single "sorry" or "if it's not too much trouble." When she was finally called, Maria entered the office already apologizing. "Sorry I'm late, doctor. It's just that I didn't know the address very well and—" "Sorry, I hope I didn't mess up your schedule." Dr. Helena, a woman about 45 years old with an attentive gaze, smiled gently. "Don't worry, Maria. You arrived right on time. How are you feeling?" "Oh, sorry to bother you with something silly, doctor, but I felt some chest pains." "Sorry, maybe it's just anxiety. Sorry to take your time with this." The doctor wrote something in the chart and continued asking questions about the symptoms. With each answer, Maria interspersed automatic apologies. "Sorry, doctor. I don't know how to explain it properly. Sorry, maybe I'm exaggerating. Sorry, you must have much more important cases." When the doctor asked her to lie down on the examination table, Maria apologized for being trouble. When the stethoscope was cold, she apologized for getting startled. When the doctor asked her to breathe deeply, Maria apologized for her breathing being a little labored. Dr. Helena performed the examination in silence, but Maria noticed that she seemed to be paying attention to something beyond the physical. "Symptoms. You can sit up, Maria," the doctor said, returning to her desk. "Sorry, doctor. I hope it wasn't too complicated. Sorry if I did something wrong during the exam." That's when Dr. Helena stopped writing. She slowly took off her glasses, cleaned them carefully, and looked directly at Maria. "Maria, may I ask you a question?" "Of course, doctor. Sorry, you can ask me anything. Have you counted your apologies since you came in here?" Maria blinked, confused. "What do you mean, doctor?" "Since you entered my office 15 minutes ago, you have apologized 12 times. 12 times in 15 minutes. Tell me, what exactly are you apologizing for?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maria felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. 12 times? In 15 minutes? Sorry, doctor, I didn't realize that. 13, the doctor gently interrupted. "Now it's 13. Maria felt the blood rise to her face. It was as if a giant spotlight had been turned on, illuminating a behavior she had been practicing on autopilot for decades. "You're apologizing for being sick, for needing medical care, for having symptoms, for breathing, for existing in my office where you have every right to be, since you scheduled an appointment and pay insurance for this." Each word from the doctor was like a magnifying glass being placed over Maria's life. She saw herself, really saw herself, for the first time in a long time. "Maria, may I ask something? When you were a child, did anyone make you feel that your presence was a bother?" The question hit Maria like a punch to the stomach. Memories began to surface. Her mother always exhausted, sighing when Maria asked for something. "Oh, Maria, one more thing for me to deal with." Her father, who worked a lot and always seemed irritated when she made noise. "Be quiet, Maria. Can't... You see I'm tired?" "It's not their fault," Maria said quickly. "Sorry, they did the best they could. Sorry, I don't want to blame anyone." 14 and 15, the doctor observed calmly. "Maria, I'm not asking you to blame anyone. I'm trying to understand when you learned that you needed to ask permission to exist." Tears began to roll down Maria's face. Not tears of sadness, but of recognition. It was as if she were seeing herself in a mirror for the first time in her adult life. "I do this all the time, don't I?" Maria asked, her voice choked. "You do this constantly, and I bet it's not just with me. You apologize for having opinions, for taking up space, for having needs, for being human." Maria nodded, unable to speak. "Your physical symptoms, this feeling of tightness in your chest, are most likely manifestations of anxiety. You're literally suffocating yourself with your own apologies." The doctor leaned forward, her tone becoming softer, more maternal. "Maria, I'm going to ask a question, and I want you to think carefully before answering. When was the last time you did something, said something, or simply existed somewhere without apologizing for it. Maria opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She really couldn't remember. Your female self-esteem has been systematically undermined by years of self-destructive behavior, the doctor continued. You've turned your existence into a perpetual apology. And this is literally making you sick. Maria felt as if she were waking up from a very long dream, or perhaps from a nightmare. Her entire adult life passed before her eyes like a fast-forward movie. Decades of diminishing herself, of apologizing, of making herself smaller. What do I do, doctor? Maria asked. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't apologize for asking a question. Dr. Helena smiled. First, you recognize the pattern, and you've already done that today. Second, you begin, slowly, to give yourself permission to exist without justifying yourself. Third, you seek professional help. A psychologist can help you understand the roots of this behavior. But mainly, Maria, you need to understand one thing. Your existence is not an inconvenience. Your needs are not excessive. Your presence in the world is not a mistake that needs to be constantly apologized for. Maria left that office with a prescription for routine tests and the contact information for a psychologist. But more importantly, she left with something she hadn't had in a long time: awareness. For the first time in decades, Maria saw herself, really saw herself. And although the image was initially frightening, it was also liberating, because we can only change what we can see. Maria woke up that Tuesday with the doctor's words echoing in her mind. 12 apologies in 15 minutes. The phrase had become her new mantra, a constant reminder of who she no longer wanted to be. At breakfast, when Carlos bumped into her, rushing to grab his briefcase, Maria automatically opened her mouth. Sore. The word died on her lips. She took a deep breath and simply continued preparing her coffee. The silence felt strange, but liberating. At the office, the first opportunity came sooner than expected. Marina, her colleague, interrupted Maria in the middle of an explanation about the monthly report. Can you speed this up? I have an important call, Marina said, drumming her fingers on the table impatiently. Maria felt the familiar impulse rise up her throat. Sorry, I'll be faster. But this time she paused. She looked directly at Marina and said, Sure, I'll wrap up in 2 minutes. This point is important for the project. Marina seemed surprised by the firm but respectful tone. Maria continued her explanation more objectively and noticed something new. Marina was actually paying attention now. During lunch, alone in the company cafeteria, Maria observed other women interacting. She noticed how some expressed themselves naturally, occupying their space without apologizing for existing. There was something in their posture, in the way they spoke, that radiated a real beauty that she recognized, but had never allowed in herself. The afternoon brought the bigger challenge. Her boss, Mr. Roberto, questioned a decision Maria had made about organizing an event. Maria, are you sure this format will work? Seems risky to me. Internally, she felt the automatic response forming. Sorry, maybe I was wrong. We can change everything. But this time, she breathed and found her true voice. Yes, I'm sure. I based the decision on data from previous events and participant feedback. I can show you the numbers that led me to this conclusion. Mr. Roberto studied her for a moment, as if he were seeing a different person. Show me the data. While presenting her arguments, Maria felt something igniting inside her, a confidence she had forgotten she possessed. It wasn't arrogance. It was simply the dignity of occupying her place and defending her work. At the end of the day, when the elevator got crowded and someone bumped into her, Maria held herself back from apologizing for the space she occupied. Instead, she just smiled politely and maintained her position. In the car, driving home, she contemplated these small victories. Each moment when she chose not to diminish herself seemed to have released a little more of her true identity. Her female self-esteem was beginning to rebuild itself, brick by brick, choice by choice. But she knew the biggest test was still to come. Her own home, where the patterns were most deeply rooted and where the people around her had gotten used to. Her diminished version. Friday dinner started as always. Maria serving everyone, making sure each plate was perfect, each glass full. But when Carlos complained that the rice wasn't cooked just right, something different happened. "Next time you can cook," she said, keeping her tone calm but firm. The silence at the table was instant. Carlos stopped with his fork in the air. Julia looked up from her phone, and Pedro, 19 years old, finally looked in his mother's direction. "What do you mean?" Carlos asked, genuinely confused. "It means that if the food isn't to your liking, you can prepare it the way you prefer," Maria responded, continuing to eat normally. Julia let out a nervous giggle. "Mom, you're acting weird today." "I'm not acting weird. I'm tired of apologizing for things that aren't mistakes." Maria looked at each of them. "Did you know that I apologize more than 10 times a day? For things like taking up space, having opinions, or simply existing?" Pedro put down his phone. "Mom, you don't do that. I do. And you all got used to it. We all got used to it." Maria got up and, for the first time in years, left the dishes on the table. "Today you can wash the dishes. I'm going to take a bath." Going upstairs, she heard confused murmurs coming from the kitchen. In the bedroom, in front of the mirror, Maria saw a woman who was rediscovering herself. She wasn't the same person who months ago apologized for her own shadow. The following week, the changes intensified. When Carlos suggested that she cancel her get-together with friends to stay home because he might need something, Maria simply said, "I'm not going to cancel. If you need something urgent, call me." The resistance came in waves. Carlos tried to use his usual condescending tone. "Maria, you're being difficult." "I'm not being difficult. I'm being clear." She continued, getting ready to go out. "There's a difference." Julia, observing the changing dynamics at home, was initially uncomfortable. She was used to a mother who was always available, always giving in. But gradually she began to notice something different in Maria's posture, a dignity that inspired respect instead of pity. The decisive moment came on a Sunday afternoon. Carlos, irritated because Maria hadn't ironed his shirts, something she always did without being asked, exploded. "I don't understand you anymore. You've changed. You've become a selfish person." Maria stopped what she was doing and faced him. For a moment, she felt the old impulse to apologize, to return to the safe pattern of always pleasing. But then she remembered the woman she saw in the doctor's mirror, someone who apologized for breathing. "Carlos, for 20 years, I apologized for having needs, opinions, and space in this house. I took care of everything and everyone, always putting myself last. If that made you feel comfortable, I understand. But comfort based on my self-annihilation isn't love. It's convenience." She approached him, and her voice was firm but not aggressive. "I didn't become selfish. I stopped being invisible. And if that bothers you, maybe it's because you got used to a version of me that wasn't real." Carlos remained silent, processing words he had never heard from his wife. "I love you," Maria continued, "but I'm not going to diminish myself anymore to make you feel bigger. One of the things I learned is that strong women aren't those who shout or attack. They're those who know their worth and don't negotiate their dignity." That night, for the first time in years, Maria looked at herself in the mirror and saw the glow of someone who was recovering her real beauty. Not the beauty that others defined for her, but the one that came from her own rebuilt self-esteem. 3 months had passed since that medical appointment that changed everything. Maria was standing in front of the same bedroom mirror, but the woman looking back was completely different. It wasn't just the straighter shoulders or the more direct gaze. It was something deeper, a presence that hadn't existed before. She had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. The phone rang. It was Marina from work. "Maria, sorry to bother you on Saturday, but could you take a look at that report? I know it's not your obligation, but—" "Marina," Maria interrupted gently. "On Monday I can help you with whatever you need. Today is my day off." "Oh, of course, sorry. You don't need to apologize. See you Monday." Maria smiled as she hung up the phone. A few months ago, she would have rushed to the computer, apologizing for not being able to help immediately, even though it was the weekend. At breakfast, Carlos commented, "You're different, more present." It was true. Maria had discovered that when she stopped diminishing herself, she automatically began to occupy her space with more awareness and dignity. Her internal emotional narrative had changed completely, from a voice that constantly apologized to one that validated itself. Julia came down the stairs and, without being asked, began to set the breakfast table. "Mom, yesterday my friend mentioned that you look younger. I think it's because you smile more." Maria realized it was true. Not the forced smile she used to please others, but a genuine smile from someone who was at peace with herself. In the afternoon, walking in the park as she had started doing on Saturdays, time just for herself that she hadn't allowed herself before, Maria reflected on the journey. It hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, relapses where the old pattern almost won, but each time she chose her dignity instead of the automatic apologies, something inside her grew stronger. She stopped in front of the lake and observed her reflection in the water. There she was, not the version others expected, nor the one she always tried to please. She was simply Maria, a woman who occupied her space in the world without asking permission, who expressed her opinions without diminishing herself, who loved without erasing herself. On the way back home, she crossed paths with a woman who seemed to be living what she had lived months before, apologizing to the waiter for bothering him when placing an order, apologizing to the child who bumped into her, even though it was the child who hadn't looked where they were going. Maria almost approached to talk to her, but decided that each woman needed to find her own path to transformation. What she could do was be the living example that it was possible to change, that it was possible to stop apologizing for existing. At home, she prepared dinner with pleasure, not out of obligation. When the family gathered at the table, she noticed how the dynamic had changed. The conversations were more balanced, everyone contributed more, and there was a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. "Mom," said Pedro, helping to serve the salad, "you know I really admire the change you've made." Maria smiled, touched by her son's words. "Thank you, sweetheart. I learned that I can't teach anyone to respect me if I don't respect myself first." Carlos, who had initially resisted the changes, now seemed more attentive and present. "You're right. I got so used to the old version of you that I didn't realize how unfair that was." That night, before going to sleep, Maria looked at herself once more in the mirror. She saw there one of the strong women she had always admired from afar, not for being perfect, but for being authentic. Her real beauty shone through genuine confidence, through the self-love she had finally found. "Stay, Bella," she whispered to her reflection, using the phrase that had become her personal mantra. It wasn't about physical appearance. It was about the beauty that comes from within, when a woman recognizes herself as valuable, deserving of respect and space in the world. She had stopped apologizing for existing, and this had transformed not only her life, but inspired everyone around her to be more authentic versions of themselves. The day Maria stopped apologizing for existing was the day she truly began to live. And you? How many times did you apologize today for simply existing? If this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Like the video, share it with a strong woman who needs to hear this. And remember, your story matters too. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories, like yours, like ours. Stay Bella.